Okay, last call. How many children do we have? Okay. Thanks for sticking around. We'll try to do this as briefly as we can, but we want to make sure that all of the questions get answered. So if you have questions, we're committed to stay here. Your leadership's committed to stay here as long as you need. All right, let me pray for us, and let's begin. Father, you are the God of our journey. You have brought us through so many things. Every step of the way, you've been there. You've been ahead of us. You've been beside us, over us, and around us, behind us. As Jeffrey finished his message this morning, yes, we affirm that more than anything, beyond anything, we want to do your will. And so we count on you, Father, to be the great listener in of these deliberations and the one who speaks with the only authority. And so we wait to hear as we wade through numbers and details and dates and times. I pray that you might baptize all of that with your holiness and with the sacredness of the work that we do. I thank you for those in our body who have taken so many hours, so many days, evenings away from their personal lives to bring these reports back together in unity, and I just thank you for their work and their faithfulness. Now we trust you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. So do we have children in here? Any children? Okay, there's one there. So for the children, there they are. Arlen's back there. For the children, as soon as I get done with my opening remarks, I'm going to go back there and kind of be the bouncer for the kids so I can stay in the room in case there's a question for me. But let me just give you, I asked to be able to open this meeting with a few comments from the pastoral perspective because, as you know, money, buildings, facilities, and so forth, all of that is relatively moot unless it is decisions that we make relative to the vision that God might be giving us for the future of the church. And so it has fallen to me and to David and to Chris to sort of frame that for the elders and the deacons. So I'm just going to give you some thoughts. Let me answer some questions up front. First of all, why have a meeting on Memorial Day weekend? Right? That's a fair question. So the timing of this meeting was driven by a couple of things. Corner Lot Development has an agreement for their financing for this project up to June 30th. After June 30th, they have to go back and renegotiate their financing for the project. And as you know, with interest rates doing what they're doing, our expectation would be that the numbers in this would change potentially significantly because of going to higher interest rates. So we're not going to force the issue. We're not trying to be in a hurry, but we are going to be deliberate and intentional about how we go about this. So with that in mind, for those of you who are here, we are committed to stay here as long as you need us as leadership. We are also broadcasting live on YouTube, and we are recording this so the people who couldn't be here on Memorial Day weekend can have access to the information. Our intent is that all the questions that you have, we will make available ourselves throughout the week, and then there will be a vote on next Sunday. If you're a member of the church, you're welcome to vote. Now, we are aware as your leaders, that we've had weeks and months of conversation about this, and you're getting things dripped to you in meetings like this. And so for that reason, we are making ourselves available as much as possible. And literally, any elder, any deacon, any staff pastor has been through all of these meetings. We can answer your questions as you have them. I would ask if, for the person who's up here, Demetrius, George, any of you, if someone from the floor asks a question, repeat the question so that the people online can know what's going on. Now, here's a big question. Why another vote? So when we voted, literally 1 year ago next Sunday, on June the 6th, we voted to move ahead with this project. We're pretty sure that most everybody in the room understood that we were voting for the sale of somewhere approximately 8 acres of land for $3.6 million. Well, those numbers have changed, and they've changed significantly enough that we felt, A, that we owed you a conversation about that, and B, that you should have the opportunity to agree with those changes. And that's what today and next week is about. Why is there a difference? And this is really important. Before George comes up and makes his presentation, we want you to understand what has happened since we started this project and why we're coming back to you. It's really important. So there was a very tedious process to get the land rezoned. On the founding fathers and mothers of this church had a site plan that had a school back there. And if we were building a school, no need for zoning change. But because of the intensity of apartments and the number of people moving in and so forth, the zoning had to be changed. In order to do that, Corner Lot and George had to go to our neighbors, had to go to meetings, some of them very contentious, with the gated communities around our property. There was a lot of concern on their part about how much boundary there would be with trees and line of sight, and that went on literally for months. And as they did that, their allowed space to build started to shrink as those boundaries were put in by the zoning people to get it approved in the zoning. On top of that, everybody who has lived in Florida more than 15 minutes knows that we have retention ponds everywhere, because by law you can't drain one drop of water on your neighbor's property. So as they went through the engineering with the issue of how do you do retention, that added to the amount of land that was going to be needed, and the guys can explain all that to you. But those are the two reasons. Their land was shrinking, their project didn't have room, and then because of retention, that's why we brought you back here. Yes. All right. All right.
But because when people developed around us, these guys, developers, they went ahead and tore out every tree right up to our property.
Right. Yeah, there was. Yes, and just 15 seconds, we've had at least 3 schools that have wanted to go back there, charter schools. We've had an assisted living facility that wanted to build on our property, and we've had a lot of commercial people asking commercially what can they put on the property. So let me just get through this real quick. So as you listen today, I put my thoughts in writing. Please be aware that this presentation has been discussed and prayed over and vetted meticulously. And all that means is that to the best of our ability as pastors, elders, and deacons, within the limited awareness of that group, we hope and think that we've answered every question. You may have a question that we didn't think about, and that's why it's important for you to be involved in this process. We've had strong disagreements. We've had differing opinions, but in the process, everybody in the room, I felt, as I observed, I felt like their motive was about God's will and what is best for the church. And so I saw this wonderful balance of faith and stewardship and vision and foresight and humility from the leadership. And so as I look at this from a slightly different perspective as the lead pastor, I just want to tell you, whatever happens next, it's been an incredible joy to work with these elders and these deacons. The work that they've done, the sacrifice that they've made, the spirit in which even the disagreements came about, and George has been amazingly wonderful working with as well. So I feel like it's important to say that no matter what happens next, because I want you to know that, and everybody here, you guys have been in church, for most of your life. You know how these things happen and what kind of conversations go on and how people get mad and don't trust each other's motives. We haven't had any of that, and it's pretty amazing. So, as I mentioned before, any discussion about land or money or facilities, future facilities, really is meaningless without some clarification about the vision going forward. And so the elders asked David and Chris and I to put some actual notes on paper for this. So let me give you just a quick summary of why we believe that this is a good idea and that it meets the needs for our ministry going forward. We are in a post-pandemic world. Ministry has changed for good. And what we're seeing is there's a decentralization of ministry, which I believe is actually a positive thing led by the Holy Spirit, by those who are listening, as Jeffrey talked this morning, because so much of church in this country for 240 years has been about getting people in a room on Sunday morning and counting those numbers, stay with me because this is important, as the measure or the metric of the faithfulness, as a measure and metric of the success or the growth of the church. And you guys know as well as I do that number is a little squirrely, right? What we're going to see going forward, and when I mean decentralizing, what I mean is that we have talked for a long time as leadership about equipping the body to do the ministry in their homes, in their neighborhoods, their communities, at work, at school, and so forth. So we will always have a need for a sanctuary because that's a anchor part of the New Testament church. But what we need going forward is not a giant box out here that sits empty 6 days a week. That's not good stewardship. And let me say to you, I have pastored a big church. I pastored a church with 1,500 members and probably another 600 or 700 people orbiting that church coming in and out. And I'm not afraid to grow. And I hope God makes us big and powerful. But I can tell you that model, the idea that somehow we are going to grow to this big thing, that model does not work. Or I'll say it another way, rarely works, because once you reach a certain size, your ability to do small groups, to shepherd well, to be on top of the needs and the discipleship and the process and all of that is very difficult. So we're not afraid to grow, and God can do whatever he wants. Somebody said to me one time, God's not concerned about numbers, and I said, well, he wrote a book about it. So he is concerned about the bigness of the church, but our goal, we're not throwing all of our time and energy into making this big. We want to be a church that has deep impact around the corner and around the world. So, putting together the original vision of the founders of Eastside, adding to that what we have learned over the years, and in particular for us right now, seeing the people that God is sovereignly giving us in this congregation, there is a stream, there's a flow, as Jeffrey was saying this morning. So just real quick, I will tell you why this change in our property works for us. Moving forward, we've got to minister to young families. That's the future of the church. We have to have a good, strong ministry to children and to youth and to the parents, the families of those children and youth. While we're focused on that, we've got to have a ministry to our aging population in our church. Here's what often happens. You get a young guy in and you say to that young guy, hey, go find us a bunch of young families. And then those people who have been faithful for decades, those people who have been the anchor and the foundation of the ministry, those people who have been faithful, who laid the first brick, so to speak, those people get forgotten. We want you to know that your leadership team, because we're all in that category anyway, your leadership team is aware that the needs of discipleship and care and soul care and so forth of our aging population is right there at the top of the list alongside young families and youth ministry. We want to continue and grow in our commitment to community outreach. We want to continue to have a strong commitment to foreign missions. And then this is one that I'll take a minute to talk about, a strong soul-caring ministry of counseling and help in time of crisis. This is our soul care moment in this culture. There is nobody I've met, Christian or non-Christian, who has not been traumatized on some level pretty significantly by the pandemic, by the politics, by all of that. This culture is an open wound. And this is, I think we are uniquely positioned as a congregation. You may remember when Mark Bernard was here a month or so ago, the guy who did the Healing the Heart of the Church 7 years ago here happened to show up. I had him come up, say a few words, and have the closing prayer. And he stood back there. He was leaning on the sound booth wall there. And I went up to greet him and say, hey, thanks for coming. And he, without even saying anything else, he looked at me and he said, this is a healing place. I said, what? He said, I'm watching your people. This is a place where people come to be healed. If you were charismatic, that would be what would be a prophetic word. Okay? And so going forward, we have a vision for this church growing in its capacity for counseling, for soul care, and so forth. We also are looking forward to the idea that this facility would become a training institute for leadership both here and around the world. And those two items, the soul care part and the training institute, are two things that I've been praying about literally for years. And so just think about what it would be like for us to be a healing place for so many people. What would it be like for us to know that you have members of this congregation teaching pastors and leaders in Africa and in Asia and in South America and so forth, sometimes traveling, but a lot of time just right in front of a screen because the miracle of modern technology. We are serious about foreign missions, and we're serious about leadership training. And so going forward, whatever facilities we have, we'll have to facilitate that. Now, that's just part of it. And there's so much more, but I want you to hear that, because what I'm about to say, and I'm almost done here, if I can get this piece of paper. So what I just said to you is that going forward, we're going to need classroom space, a lot of classroom space. We're going to need Tim's pet peeve. We're going to need a lot of storage space. There's very little storage space right now. We're going to need space for activities for children and youth, either indoor or outdoor, or ideally both. We're going to need to minister to young families. So imagine what it would be like for someone who lives in one of the 240 apartments, who drops her child off at a preschool at Eastside Community Church across the parking lot, walks around the corner to the best coffee on Beach Boulevard, gets in her car and goes to work and comes back and picks up her child. And imagine the ministry that we could have to people like that with just some classrooms, some space dedicated to that. Over time, we're going to need more office space. We're going to need room for counseling and care. We're going to need facilities for leadership training with the technology that goes with that. Those of you who remember when UET, the first couple of years I was here, Conscious brought all those teenagers here, and you guys had to build outdoor showers for them, really cold outdoor showers. Imagine, just as one idea, a gymnasium where the 50 young people sleep there, take showers there, get their food there, go out and do ministry in the community. So we're going to need a facility like that. We're going to need classroom, storage, bathroom facilities. What we don't need, again, is a giant box that sits empty 6 days a week. We don't need that. In this room here, if you multiply services, take this room and multiply 450 by that, and for the foreseeable future, we can do all kinds of things that we need to do for worship in this facility. What I've just said to you is that on the practical level, if we build, we will have 2 facilities that are multi-purpose. That, to me, has the ring of stewardship to it, if that makes sense. So we're not talking about that today, but what we are saying is that when you see this property and the changes that have been made, we are coming to you as leadership and saying, we believe, even though our parcel has been squeezed some, we believe that for the foreseeable future, Eastside Community Church can fulfill its vision with what is left for us after corner lot develops the apartments back in the back. And we're also saying that the added money is significant because going forth in the 21st century in post-pandemic ministry, having financial resources is going to become more important than having land. And you may not believe that, but take that as a evangelical free church version of a prophecy from me that I think that's what's going to happen going forward. Now, when that money comes, everybody and their brother is going to have an idea about how that gets used, right? Every missionary in the universe is going to contact our church when they find out we have this money. Every homeless person, everybody's going to come because they hear that we have this. And that's why we have to have a vision up front, and that's why we have to have good gatekeepers for that money so that we use it exactly the way God wants us to use it. So there are going to be some of you who are going to say, we need to give a bunch to missions. And there are going to be some of you who say, yeah, but we also have problems in this facility here that need to be fixed. And somebody else is going to say, well, if we could staff with so-and-so and so-and-so, and we could accomplish this dream. And somebody else will say, well, maybe we could take some of that money and we could build a building. And then somebody will say, yeah, but why don't we put a bunch of it in the bank and earn interest on it and live off of that? And so all those questions will be dealt with. But I want to challenge you with what you're going to hear today and the amount of money we're talking about, we can do all those things. So I guess, George, you're up next. George Leone, thank you for working so hard to bring us to this point, and I'll turn the microphone over to you. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. All right. Man, a year flew by, didn't it? I feel like it wasn't long ago I was standing up here having the same conversation. So it's a little different today, and we'll try and walk you through briefly how we got to this point. Can't echo enough the leadership team that we have at this church. It is amazing. Countless hours and hundreds of emails, texts, phone calls, hours of meetings, the leadership team, I can't stress enough, it does not take this lightly. So just know that I feel like this has been a very well vetted process and a great experience, I will say. So as a parishioner here, it feels good to know that we have the right people leading our church. So anyway, I'll get right to it. Can we go to the next slide? Another one beyond that. Okay, so just to refresh everybody's memory, this is the architecture. This is just a rendering of the type of building that we're going to build here. It's the nicest building that we build. If we think of the color scheme and the architecture will fit in well with the current design and style of our church. The 4-story buildings, there's 40 apartment units in each building, and we will have 6 buildings total. There will also be a separate clubhouse, pool, and maintenance facility. So I'll walk you through that when we get to the site plan. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the site plan that I presented a year ago. Basically, you see the 6 buildings. We had a little more room to spread things out back then. We knew going through the process that we would have some challenges with the neighbors. You never really know exactly what those challenges are going to be until you start the process and you start working through them. So many times what we have is we have challenging neighbors. We can usually work with the city council and staff. Oh, sure. Is it removable? Okay. Sure. Guess I'll hold it down here a little bit. We always know there are going to be challenges, and rightfully so. I mean, if there was a development coming in your own backyard, you'd want to know that your concerns are going to be taken care of and met. So I will say it was a long and arduous process, longer than we typically take. We started in June. Immediately after the vote, we didn't even have a contract on the land yet, but we went ahead and started the process because we knew as a congregation we were moving forward. So got everything filed. I think we had our first public meeting in August or September because it takes a couple months for staff to review things, get everything back. In the first public meeting of next door at the library, there was a good amount of people that came out, and they weren't as gracious as the people in this room, but we learned a lot, right? So I don't take those things personally. I mean, people, your mind wanders and wonder what's going to happen. So we tried to look at it as opportunities to get to know people. So we met a lot of our neighbors around us, which was pretty enlightening. Many of whom didn't really know what we did here in our church. So it was kind of interesting. It was also interesting to see how God leads us to reach out to the neighbors through this process and get to know them, and maybe, sprinkle some seeds or some winds, as Jeffrey would say, to let them know what we're doing here. So as Tim illustrated or spoke previously, the big thing that came up was buffers around the property. They didn't want to see the trees come down. They didn't want people in the apartments looking down on their homes, et cetera. Natural concerns. So we had to pull our development footprint closer in, tighten it up, and we tightened it up as much as we could with the space we had available, and added land to the perimeter property so we can keep natural buffers. We're also going to go in and plant additional plantings in those buffers because we have great tall pine trees here, but what happens is there's not a whole lot of understory on the pine trees. So while there's good natural screening, we're going to plant more to help, further enhance the buffer between the neighbors. So one thing that happened that was probably the most significant was if you look at the entrance road that comes off Beach Boulevard, it's the new entrance road. It's where the current, if you're going east on Beach, there's current left turn lane there. Many of you that come from that direction probably have to make that U-turn to come into the church. So we're going to connect there. You won't have to make that U-turn anymore. We'll have a new dedicated entry drive that will serve the apartments mainly, but the church as well. The church will have rights over that entrance drive for access in perpetuity. the apartment community will maintain the road, maintain the landscaping, keep it all up at a nice level so that there'd be a nice entrance to the church that we can all use. But with the buffers being added, you can kind of see that greenish blue color there. That's a retention pond that we're going to have to build because the road coming in needed a way for the stormwater to be retained. By adding the buffers, it displaced that retention pond. So we had to find a new place to put it. We would have put it back in the back if we had the room, but we got compressed as well. So we're like, okay, how are we going to do this? We had to get the zoning done, so that was first thing first. And then we sat down and started having a lot of meetings with the elders and figuring out how are we going to best serve this. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is where we landed. So this is the current site plan. I know it's probably not easy for you all to see out there, but you can see around the perimeter of the property, those speckled dots are existing trees that are going to be retained. They're going to stay. We're not going to clear them. The only other place to put the pond was out along Beach Boulevard in front of the church. So none of us really want to do that, but we kind of had to have it somewhere. So we're thinking, okay, what's the best use for this pond? How are we going to make it an amenity to the church, and instead of something that might, when we think of retention ponds, you might think of something that's unsightly, not well kept, etc. Our pond in the back is, fenced off. It's kind of hidden. It's not the greatest looking thing right now, but there is a way to enhance them and make them look nice. So we're going to add a nice feature retaining wall to it. There'll be a fountain in it. We'll landscape it very nicely and appropriately, and it'll be professionally maintained. So it'll be a nice feature when you pull in front of the church. We've also sized it appropriately for future possible expansion of the church, so that whenever the building is built that Tim was referencing, one of the costs that the church won't have to incur is providing retention for that building, because when the building's built, you're going to displace water, so you have to have that retention. So that'll be an expense that we've covered and already handled, and the pond will be sized appropriately for it, and then access as well off the entry road. We're also there's where the parking stops on the west side of the church between the library. It was collectively decided, this wasn't required of my development plans, but we collectively thought it would be more efficient to remove the driveway from where the parking stops out to the library entrance. I don't know how many of you come in that way, but it's kind of challenging slowing down on Beach Boulevard, pulling in and kind of making that sharp turn. So we thought, hey, let's make an improvement there, utilize some of that land for the pond so we can keep it as close to Beach Boulevard as possible, allow for the future expansion, and improve the traffic circulation within our parking. So we're going to move that down. Where the parking stops currently on that side, there'll just be a little loop that connects to the library drive. So it'll be much easier coming in and out. You'll have much more room to work with, and we'll make sure that it's designed appropriately to work well with the library's traffic whenever there's, some that mixes there. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a few bullet points that I touched on. The pond is required for the entry road off beach. It'll accommodate the future church expansion. It'll be maintained. The pond will be maintained by the apartment community, so that won't be a maintenance obligation of the church. The existing church pond in the back, we're going to take ownership of that as the apartments. We're going to maintain it in perpetuity. The church will have access and drainage rights because the church's water still goes that way. We're going to make improvements to it and enhancements so it'll be more of a feature as well. Throughout this process, I'm on both sides of the coin here, right? I'm the developer, but I'm also a member. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, how can I shift some obligations of the church over to the apartments because I've got partners over there, and maybe it won't affect our numbers as much over there, where it could be a big issue for us as a church. So trying to take some of these maintenance obligations away from the church, put them on the apartments. The church will still have rights. So that's the important thing to know. If something's, as long as I own the apartments, it'll be handled appropriately. You never know down the road where our future takes us. If something's not being handled appropriately, the church will have rights to step in and make sure it's handled appropriately. So hopefully it never happens, but just so you all know, there's not going to be someone who can take over that property and cause problems for us in the future. The church will have plenty of rights there. That's it for that slide. If we can go to the next one, I don't know that I have much more. Okay, then that's Demetrius. Do you want to speak and then we'll get the question and answer, or okay?
Thank you, George. And all of you, if you don't, everybody knows me, Deacon Chair Demetrius Jenkins. What I want to do is hopefully give you some visualizations of what we've already touched on and speak on the future site plan needs, since the deacons have kind of taken that role of site planning provision. So one of the issues that we have with the pond on the land, of course, is the concern for the future development and how it was possibly limiting us for what we wanted to do. So what we did, the combined board reached out to Ron Scalisi, whom you may know is the architect of this building and the architect of the site plan as was drawn up many years ago with what we anticipated on doing. We also talked to the CLD and their team, Don and a couple others who helped us really steer in the direction that we ended up going. And 4+ acres is where we're landing at here, being left with. And so what you can see right now is this entire building, from the moment you walk into all the offices, is 17,500 square feet, 17,500 square feet. With just, if you took a little bit of the building that we were going to add on to the wing here, it would have been roughly around 9,000 square feet. So if we just added 9,000 square feet, it would be over half of the size of what we have currently. And when you tie into what Tim was talking about, classrooms, office space, storage, possibly other things that we need, that is a lot of space of what we are using now. All right, and then that's just the first floor. And George's team have designed the pond to accommodate right now up to about 25,000 square foot of a footprint. That's just the first floor. So we could possibly go up a floor or two. So that gives us an idea. 25,000 square feet is more than almost twice what we have now, okay? That's in addition to this building. So then the pond, the question is, what is the pond gonna look like? Now, if you kind of came in and you saw those cones, some of you have already asked me, what are those cones for? That marks where the pond is basically going to be. It's 230 feet from the front of our building. The pond is gonna start there and go close to the sidewalk, okay? So some people thinking, okay, well, what does that really look like? Most of us have played sports or watched sports. What that leaves us with in between those two areas is basically more than a football field width. And once we remove that driveway or that street coming in, the east and west span will be almost a football field's length as well. So that gives us a lot of green space to continue to do the things that we do, our excuse me, our Easter egg hunt and activities, fall events, just going out there with the rock and having the 9 square battles and everything else. So we will have still quite a large footprint with which to work with. Now that could change if we decided to do anything where the footprint of a building would go out and go southernwards, but nonetheless, that would leave us with in the interim would be a great size for that development for use for our youth and other activities. The next slide. What the combined board took away from this process, and again, this was a process that spanned multiple hours of meetings and emails and so many opportunities to talk, and George kindly mentioned about the first meeting being a little less friendlier than this one, and that would be an understatement. But what we came to realize is, obviously the buffer and other factors, the timeline, the interest rates, they really caused us to have this retention pond placed on our property. And so instead of making that an issue, we decided to turn that into a feature. The compensation, of course, for the extra land will, and I don't know if we talked about the number, from $3.6 million now to $5 million for the extra land that was going to be above and beyond the approximate 8 acres. Okay, so we would be left with a remaining 4+ acres. So I think it's roughly around 4.3, 4.26, something around that area. That is, we believe, enough land for us to utilize for our future land needs. And so that brings us today. We, as a unified board, have unanimously recommended that this plan goes through. However, you know that this is a congregational-led church, so it is on all of us to make that decision. And so you are going to have to approve this, and voting is how you're going to do that. Members can vote, and if you are not going to be here next week, you can vote. We've got it set up now. If you're not here, you're listening to this online, and you're not going to be here today or tomorrow or next week, you can send me an email, and you can clearly affirm you can affirm or not affirm the approval of this site plan to sell for, and you could word it however you want to, but you need to affirm or not affirm. Okay, yes and no, it's great, but affirm or not affirm. And we need to have those votes in by next Sunday at 11:30 so that we can continue to go on. Again, we know that that's going to be in the June month where the rate sheet is going to expire. So we really need to get that answer in so that we can have a clear direction. One of the other things, and before I take questions, I would add on, is that the deacons and the elders, the pastors, the staff have really tried to, we've really solicited, and we thank you all for the prayers, the individual conversations that you've had with us to help us form this decision. And so we don't take it lightly. And then the last thing I'll say is one of the benefits of the road going away, that little driveway, is that it decreases our impervious or impermeable area, which goes into the calculations of how big of a pond we need. We worked with these guys to do everything. I mean, literally, I don't think we left any stone unturned to reduce the size of that pond. He's putting a bulkhead in so it can actually have more capacity. They worked out a deal with the library to take over their pond. So many things that we tried to do, and some of them I can't really speak to just because I'm not as proficient. But we did a lot of things so that we can reduce the size of that pond. So with that, I want to open up questions. We really want to hear from you all. If you have a question, either let me come to you or stand up so that I can clearly hear you, and then I will repeat it. We have a second mic if somebody wants to run. Wonderful. So questions. I think I saw Lori. You wanna let Marlena get her exercise? Okay.
I just want to make sure about the future use of the pond, retention pond. so that in 10 years, if we decide to build, there will not be a requirement for additional retention creation. And that'll be in the deed or something in writing or something that future will allow us to grow without adding another retention pond.
Yes, the pond as it's constructed, as you see, if you want to put the site plan back up, Tim, the pond is designed currently for the needs of corner lot, the additional needs for corner lot, plus our future needs up to 25,000 square feet. So if we decided to put a building for 10 or 12,000 square feet, it still has more capacity, up to 25,000 square feet. And it is, I apologize. So we are currently working with both sides, our lawyer and their lawyer, to create an amendment to revise the original contract. And that is one of the things that we are putting in. And Tim, you want to?
One quick clarification to her question. That all assumes that the city of Jacksonville doesn't radically change their laws going forward about retention. In other words, we're living in the retention laws of today. We're assuming that those laws are going to stay the same. We don't have any indication they're going to change. We are at the mercy of the.
And to recap what Tim said, that capacity is reflected on today's requirements by the city, by the county. So if in 10 years the county revises that, that may change, but they are building in that capacity based on what those numbers are for today.
Yeah, so that's not a legal thing that goes in the deed. What goes in the deed is who's to maintain it and those different obligations, which right now is on them for as long as we can have that. And Bert, who's the lawyer, the real estate lawyer, is trying to put everything in there, setting these obligations out. And yes, that is only based on today's standards. That's what we need, but we've got it at 25,000. There's a lot of different things you can do, and this, we could build out just a little bit out in front of this to make this building longer. That's not what people think we need to do. But if it ever came that, there's land up front. But right now, it's whatever dirt you're covering, whether it's just with asphalt on it or whether it has a 3-story building on it, that land no longer takes water, so you have to have a retention pond. The retention ponds here, the two behind us, they have to be there for us even to have this building. We would never be able to stop doing that. That's why we have to have those easement rights with them to have it. And now we're being able to say they've got to maintain it. So that's going to be nice. And we even have obligations with their retention pond where we have a joint use. The pump station, we need to make sure that we're okay on the pump station, guys, because that's joint with the library. I don't know, your pump station is going to be totally different. Probably.
Yeah, they got a separate
But we
one.
want to make sure we're okay in that. So that's that issue with what you just said. But one of the, Lori, and we have one of the top lawyers drafting this stuff, and we're trying our best, and we're really putting a lot of these things in there. But one of the things I was just talking with Tim about, this is a neat thing to get $5 million to the church. We do not need the money. Jay's here. You're the head of the deacons. Every year we've had enough money to do what we've wanted to do. And even this year we're doing really well. God's really taking care of us. We're not doing this because we need money. The market is really well right now for this real estate. We were looking at this stuff. We were at 1.2 at times. There's a phrase in real estate called highest and best use. There is not a better use than apartments back there. That's why schools were offering us, why the nursing home was offering us $1 million. Schools were offering us 1.2, and maybe we got somebody to 2 one time. This is the highest and best use. The other thing is, with our PUD the way it was, we would so offend our neighbors by building on that 10-foot line based on what their developers did to them. We just wouldn't be a church to the community at that point, and people would be very upset with us. So that's what the elders were trying to do. And I'm not one right now, but I mean, that was what we were trying to do. You aren't going to find a school or any of these other people that can put the money in advance and hire the lawyers that George had to hire to be able to work out with all these surrounding communities. George, I don't know if you want to share it, but I think you're over 200,000 right now, more than that, in just efforts. These nonprofits and schools and the nursing homes that we're talking to us, there's no way they would pre-spend that without a contract that they could go to the bank with. And George doesn't have that right now based on these changes. So those are important things to be thinking about, and just to know that those are all things that have been considered. And really, the obligations for all this water around us are obligations we have too. And if we want to do anything further with this building, we have to have this water. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that affects our church is that road down the side, that it's really going to help us. And people turning in here and coming in here, that is going to really improve this church, the community, and if we can do these other buildings later.
Thank you, Don. Yes, and to give a little bit of insight in there, we do feel that this is the best suitor. We talked about this about a couple months ago, 6-8 months ago, about being good neighbors. If you attended one of the meetings, we wanted to be good neighbors. And this is one of the best uses that we feel not only can provide the financial, steward or the financial backing to get the project done. We had talks with Cassia. They kind of had issues there, and some of the schools that we talked with, the charter schools, could not even offer what we were asking for the back property per acre, let alone, all the other things that they were looking for. So we do feel financially this is the best suitor. And then we also think being a good neighbor, having families, 240 possible families right behind us would be a better fit, better ways to, or a better utilization of traffic flow. We don't have all that influx of schools, and we don't have to deal with a disassociated retail partner that doesn't really care that we're here. They just want our frontage. So I think that this is really the best way, and for us to have somebody within our body to have this, to have his position and to build this property, I think also helps score that. So I think I saw Mrs. Go ahead, Chair. When we get to the Bullingtons, they're so patient.
Nothing has been said about expansion of parking. So if we eventually build onto the building, if we eventually have additional activities and things here, have you considered the need for expanding our parking? Now, I know we share parking with the library, which is convenient when the library is not open. But if I understand right, also in the development of the property, if we had to expand the parking, then that affects the retention pond, that permeability factor. So has parking been considered?
Parking has been considered, and I do have Gary McDonald not here today. He's one of the ones that, and being an architect, has really been pushing that. So yes, to back up, we have a shared agreement in perpetuity with the library, and most of our events that happen on Sunday or outside of library hours. And so we have rarely, even when, if you remember, when we were going to 2 services, we would fill that library and the library's parking spot. So right now, based on our numbers, we're not concerned about that. However, with additional buildings, we have, and we've mocked up and kind of looked at how that's going to, or taken a look at what that's going to be, and that's going to be dependent. Now, we don't have to, and I'm going to say this, I'm hopefully going to ask for grace and mercy if needed, but based on our parking is based on what this sanctuary is rated to hold. So we don't have to expand our parking if we don't build a bigger sanctuary. Now, if we do have other, we find that we have a need for more parking. We talked about kind of redoing our parking spaces now because we have the little drop off and then a curve. We're losing a couple spots there. We talked about a couple things there. We also talked about with the new building, depending on how big we build, there would be additional parking spaces going along. We can continue to extend that there. And again, yes, that would go into the calculation of the impermeable area.
We're adding some parking on.
Oh, yes. And I forgot to mention that in their road, there's going to be a couple of parking spaces that we will also have a cross-license agreement to use. And I think there are about 8 or 10 spots, something like that. So When we get to the point where parking is going to become an issue, I think we will address that in a holistic, a little bit more specifically. But we have thought about that, and we've got sketches and some other calculations, and that's why we sent to CLD, hey, listen, we need this pond to accommodate that. But because we still own the land that the pond will be on, in, whatever, we can expand that as needed.
Church's parking is purely related to the size of the sanctuary.
Yes.
The number of people in it.
And as long as, in some of those events, if we do get to the point where, we're going to have a noon event or an event on Saturday whenever the library is open, then we would have to be good neighbors and see if they need that capacity and be up front. My wife has had an event here for her job a couple of years ago, and we've had to direct people parking on the field in front, so you can still utilize that, because I believe we're going to have to remove the utilities, and so we won't have hopefully, I could be speaking out of turn there, but you could park on so much of the grass there. Mrs. Bullington, you had a question?
Not a question, just a statement. I was just going to say, we're focused on really the opportunity of ministering to the new community of the apartments, but I think it's going to be an amazing testimony to the neighborhoods we have beside us, because they're gated communities. We can't get in. And those who were blessed to be at the meeting, it's been quite the challenge, And so the one thing that we have communicated to this community is that we want to be good to our community. And so hopefully that will be a huge testimony to our community of how we are and how we operate, what our hearts are.
Certainly. And we have to remember, right, our name is ECC Community, and we've really vowed to be good neighbors. Tracy?
So I thought I heard you say that we would still own the property that the pond is on, as well as the one in the back? No. So we would own the land to the front, but the development company would have the maintenance responsibilities for both. So I was wondering why we would treat the ponds differently, I guess, like why the property ownership would be different, and why the, how with that differences, but the maintenance being the same, right?
Yeah. So to answer that question, part of the calculation that says total acreage of land, how much you can cover that land with non-permeable, with a building or driveway, fits into a total acreage. So us keeping the pond as our property gives us more room. That counts as part of our total acreage, and so therefore it lets us build more on the property that's left, okay? The benefit really is not for corner lot in maintaining it. George, as he said earlier, has looked for ways to take some of those responsibilities and cost off the church and put them on the apartment complex. So therefore, that's why the apartment complex is going to be legally responsible for maintaining it, even though we own it. So we're being benefited from that by doing that. But part of the reason why we're keeping that is so that our property, overall property amount, allows us to build more on this, because what's left. Does that make sense?
And the other aspect to that is the pond, we want to we want it to be maintained, because it is going to be something that we all see, and others. So there's not really much that we've done to the pond in the back. I mean, it's out of sight, out of mind. So this one having a bulkhead and a fountain, what if that fountain is broke? You know, I'm going through, I think our HOA is doing it in my place, and, you know, the fountains are expensive. So, like I said, take the burden off of us and put it on them. But helping that, going towards our calculations of what we can do is the primary reason. Okay, Jeff.
Hello. I just wanted to see with the community that's being added to, they have family like each of us, and the capacity of parking for their residents and then additional visitors. Is that going to intertwine with our parking come time to time? I don't know if those two kind of, you know, get tangled or not, or they already have a plan to add additional space, take away the pool size and reduce it to add additional parking or not. I guess that's up to the community to futurely invest, you know, but I just thought maybe that.
It's a good question, Jeff. The parking that corner lot has earmarked for that what's not needed for their development is mostly contained inside their lot there. There's a couple of spaces that we're going to have that cross-use agreement, but I think reading into your question, what if people are parking in our spots because, you know, it's easier for them to park and walk or something like that? Then, again, in the interest of being good neighbors, yes, we might put a flyer like, hey, join us for church. But if it doesn't bother us through the rest of the week, you know, if it becomes unruly, maybe we take the approach of, hey, we need to talk to some of these people. But I don't think that and we've talked about this before, I don't think based on the clientele that we're going to have that, you know, problem by and large. Do you want to speak to that, Chris? No? George.
I can talk to it. So, yeah, the apartments will not have any rights to park on the church property at all. So if they're there and they're a nuisance, we have a professional management company that will manage it. We'll have a property manager on site, maintenance supervisor, leasing agent. There'll be a staff of 3 or 4 people here on any given day in the apartments, managing the property. So if there is an issue, we can't control everybody. I don't see why someone would park there. But if it does become an issue, you know, the deacons, myself, whoever, will be able to reach out to the manager and say, hey, we need to address this. Maybe a friendly reminder at first, and then, you know, there's a lot of ways to handle it with towing services and whatnot. So I don't foresee it being an issue regularly. No, that was one of the things that was sacrificed as a part of the rezoning process. By condensing our site, we lost the opportunity to do those items.
So how many spaces are allocated per apartment?
1.4, and that's an industry standard. We've parked apartments as low as 1.2, and it's worked fine. Generally, we try to hit at least 1.3.
Okay, just a quick question. Well, no, actually 3 questions. I'm not a deacon nor an elder, but I am a physician, so I'm highly trained to think the worst. That's right. So I have 1 illegal question, and I know you guys have probably already dealt with it, 2 financial, and 3 a demographic question. George, 330,000 people are moving to Florida every year, from what I'm understanding, or at least last year. So the viability of your company, you definitely feel you can fill these 240 buildings. It's going to be a financial success, because that does have some ramifications concerning us. So that's the first demographic question. So I just need probably a yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Number 2 is the a legal question. If things happen, our economy goes in a super crash, stocks fall 90%, I got to think the worst, you know, that type of thing. Legally, if your somebody else comes and buys there, I'm assuming that we're setting up in our agreement, the contract, that whoever buys your company will take over like responsibility for the 3 retention ponds, I'm
Yes.
assuming. Okay, and Don, that can be done, right?
Yes, and George, you're right on the right point. So all those obligations, that once, let's say they sell it to somebody else, those things in the deed, they follow all those easements. The big problem is, what if something happens before George gets it built? I think this is the most valuable piece of property they have, or one of the best properties they have, the most lucrative development, that this would be one that would be a key property for them. If they haven't finished. But if they haven't finished it, the economy falls, and that goes into bankruptcy.
Right.
Once it goes into bankruptcy, that could create a lot of issues with what happens with those deeds and all that stuff. And then there's all these obligations that then would have to be worked out with the trustee and things like that. If something like that happened, I don't, George maybe can address this issue.
Man.
I know that Bert, I brought these issues up to Bert. I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer and I'm not a real estate lawyer. Bert and I have talked about this and everything that he can do with the documents he's doing, but he's not a bankruptcy lawyer either. But when if hell goes in the, that would be a huge problem if that happened immediately and the project wasn't done. But if the project's done, whoever takes over that land, those deeds are those deeds, and those easements with us are those easements with us to a certain extent, but go ahead. I don't know.
Yeah, and that was you read my mind, because do the finances come in first if things do go bad? Do we have the money and then they have to figure it out and we keep going as a church, or do we lose the land and the money sort of run in escrow or whatever for 30 years? So I'm thinking the worst, but I'm just trying to understand.
So let me just rephrase the question. So the question is, if something were to happen to the apartments, bad economy crash, the Great Recession, so to speak, what would happen? So that's the beautiful thing about apartments is, and they're highly invested in nationally because they're traditionally a very safe investment. To the equivalent of like bonds, not stocks, right? Bonds will fluctuate in value, but they're consistently going to pay out an interest rate. With apartments, that's also a great thing is they're annual leases. They come up for renewal. People, our population's continuing to expand. We just may have to drop rents, depending on what is happening in the marketplace to continue to keep them full. But generally, if you look at the Great Recession, the apartments didn't have an issue. They lose revenues, yes, but our operating expenses as a ratio of what the rents come in is very low. The debt is the biggest expense in the property, so you have many stakeholders throughout the way. Me being the developer, I don't want to see my investment lost. I have other partners. I have capital partners that have significant amounts of money invested. They won't want to see their investment lost. The bank is the ultimate fail-safe at the end. They definitely won't want to see their investment lost. So there's a lot of steps along the way before it gets to that doomsday scenario. It is not going to happen. I'll tell you that right now. It is emphatically not going to happen.
On June 20, whatever, when they close, we get all of our money. Irregardless of what else happens after that, Eastside Community Church has gotten the $5 million in our pockets at that point.
Not our pockets, but in the church's designated bank account. And Mark, are you planning on being around at this Rapture 90%? No, just playing. Any other? The youth pastor needs a raise. No. Any other questions? Jeff.
Is this surveillance to a certain extent? Is that's another expansion possibility with the building, expanding one day, but as the population, you know, like 240 people grow back that way, does the scope of the surveillance, you know, kind of, you know, go broader, you know, for I say especially I guess the library and the church, you know, so I guess an agreement with the church and the library and the property, the back there apartments, you know, I just didn't know. I didn't know if those three have agreed already on just, you know, for security purposes.
It's a good question. Security, how do we handle having another partner in? And so I'll answer that in a couple of ways. One, you know, as you know, we have had issues with those whom want to illegally utilize and stay on our land. We've had people cause fires, et cetera. So we think that having corner lot develop who will have security and a full-time staff on more days of the week than we do will help mitigate some of that. Of course, most of the property that'll be left for those people to utilize will not be there. So, or it will be with corner lots provisions. Now, because of the library does attract people whom will utilize certain, you know, parking space and they'll stay out there. I think when they see that there's other, you know, another thing going on, it's going to be less of a place for them to hide out or to stay the night or whatever. And so I think there'll be less of that. But in the interim, I think, or when everything is said and done, I think we'll learn how to adjust, and it may become more of, like Pastor Tim said, it may become more of a destination for people to say, hey, I want to come, I need some help, because they see, you know, us here more clearly than they probably have in the past. But it's one of those things, and there's not really a clear answer in the sense that we will have to see how that really works out, because we're in a unique situation. One of the few churches next to a regional library, and then we will have very high-end neighbors to the east and north of us. Now we will have an apartment complex there. Again, another residential community. So.
Thing, but the third one feels great. I'd say it feels like a concentrated secureness that I was kind of like thinking that without the further expansion or investment or whatnot, you know, there was like two different sides, you know, important on both ends, like the library and the church. But there was just something significant needed that it felt like a completion, you know, grid, and I feel like it's a care like no other time. Like we hope for at the Ark Village to have that at some point, you know, where we have additional land used to the best of their ability, you know, and this is a great example to further expand, to show the Ark that there is a great idea about utilizing the land without wasting it and stuff like that. So thank you for being a great example.
You're welcome.
Will this will college kids that went at this, George, do you think maybe college kids and then kids working on their masters at UNF, which there's more and more people coming there for grad school, that this would be a place that potentially could have college students in it in some way or shape or form?
Sure. You know, there's fair housing laws. We can't discriminate or try to tell certain groups of people they can't rent from us. So, you know, but I think the rents that we're going to be charging will be a lot more than what a traditional college kid would be willing to pay. But you never know. I mean, we opened a apartment community in St. Johns County recently, in the last month, pre-leased right away, went very fast. But there was such a shortage of housing at Flagler College in St. Augustine, which was like 30 miles away from this apartment community. There's a lot of kids living in their parents' house. And there was some that came over and rented. Now, that was a small fraction, but we were really surprised to see that there was some college kids that did rent. So it is a possibility. I don't see it being, it's going to be like a 1 or a 2 off out of the 240. It's not going to be a big deal.
What's your time frame for getting all this done so that it's developed and in the position where these easements are all are in place? When you getting these buildings built, are you thinking if this thing goes through, by the time you get your financing, when would you have it done to where it's, boom, up and running?
As far as built and operational, so we will, the closing, just give you a little timeline. I'll walk you through it, right? So the closing would happen before the end of June. We would own the land. We'd still have some permitting that we have to wrap up with the city that we've already filed for. They're all in process. We expect all of that to receive all of our permits by the end of July, maybe first week of August. So I would anticipate we'll break ground early to mid-August of this year. So a couple months. So it's going to happen soon. And then it'll take about 8 to 10 months to get our first, our clubhouse and maybe the first building completed so we can open for leasing and start bringing people in to start leasing the apartments. And then generally after that point, you get 1 building per month that comes online because you want to time that with leasing the apartments. You don't want a bunch of empty apartments sitting there. So it's about a 14 to 18 month process. And I say a range like that just because with construction today, there's all kinds of material shortages and stuff that kind of delays the schedule. It doesn't stop the construction, but it can delay us a little bit. So, but generally 18 months from now, we'll be operational and out of everybody's hair.
I think,
The school back here, it really affects the exit. That's one of the things Jay had pointed out. You really affect everybody on Beach Boulevard when you put a school back here, a charter school, because they cannot use buses. So you are talking about all your neighbors having a funny vibe about you and your sign, because while they're looking at your sign dead stopped, while all these cars are pulling out, it creates an issue. We already have that on the other side of the road, so that's another big thing.
I think we're going to close in.
Yes, we will
Okay.
close in prayer. Before we do that, if you have any questions, if you're listening to me and you can't ask me a question right now, you can ask us questions. And throughout this week, we really need you all to continue to just shower us, bathe us, drown us in prayer, if you will, during this. I mean, we've enjoyed it over this time, but we really need that continued guidance. But if you have comments and questions, feel free to come up to any one of us in the next week or two. You can begin voting today, or you can email me or vote next week, okay?
And the email address?
Email address is up there. Let me see. Man, I got too many email addresses. Let me tell you which one is the right one.
djenkins@eastsidecommunity.org.
Yeah, that's right. D. Jenkins, no dot, at eastsidecommunity.org. And you will clearly affirm or not affirm your vote.
Okay, George, thank you so much, not just for today, but just helping walk us through this process. Just one quick reminder, and we're done. This is not a financial decision. This is a spiritual decision. This has to do with the direction of the church for the foreseeable future. So this is not a cash grab. This is us thinking through, praying through, visioning out what we think God wants us to do in the next few years. And so bathe this in prayer. There is no secular, sacred distinction in the life of a believer. It's all sacred. Father, thank you for all that you provide for us every day. To think that we are here deliberating over just the wealth of this community, the wealth of this church, the wealth of your grace and mercy poured out on us, when so many of your children around the world have so much less than we have. Please, Father, whatever we do, deliver us from selfishness, deliver us from foolishness, and please bring to us unity of direction, of mission, and vision in this church. We want to do, Lord Jesus, you're the head of the church. We want to do what you want us to do. We pray that in your name.